What a wonderful crowd. All these smiling faces at the end of day 3 of a busy trade show. It's gotten to the point I can't walk anymore, so I'm going to do most of this sitting down and grunting, I think. How many people are compressing software now? Okay, how many people have heard of the word compression? How many people just saw the chairs and decided to come on in and sit down anyway? I'm glad you're all here. My name is Larry Jordan. We're going to talk about video compression. I'm going to use Compressor 4. However, for those of you that are using things like Telestream Episode or Sorensen Squeeze or other compression applications, much of what I say today will apply to all the other applications. The only thing that will be different is when I start to talk about specific interface things. But the compression is compression is compression is compression. Whatever software you're using, the rules are the same. And I'm going to go through both the rules and I'm going to go through how the software works. And then for those of you, wait a second, let me check with my expert. Mr. Chris, sir, yes. Am I the last session for today? In which case, I'll stay as long as you guys have questions. So unless they throw me out of the room and say, Larry, we are tired, we want to go home, it's midnight, I'll be answering questions because I don't fly out of here till Sunday. So if you're obsessed with trying to get questions answered, you may be buying me dinner, but I'll be here. I want to explain key concepts in compression, some of the key terms. I'll illustrate a complete workflow for compressing video for YouTube, compressing video for a standard website, and we'll also show how to create and customize compression settings, work with compression filters, do watermarks, that sort of stuff. I do compression on a daily basis. We're fighting all the battles that all of you are working with. Firefox doesn't do MOVs. Firefox wants WebM, and Chrome wants something else, and Safari wants something else, and YouTube needs one thing, and Vimeo needs something else. And what's supposed to be a really easy process has turned into just a nightmare of drives me nuts. But you want to worry about the right things. If you are prepping files for streaming, then you need to worry about recompression. If you feed a file to YouTube, YouTube will always recompress your media, always. So you never give YouTube a highly compressed file because it's throwing away essential data. If you're prepping files for download, you worry about file size. You want the smallest possible file size you can get. If you're prepping files for transfer from one computer to another using a service like Dropbox or Streamclip or some other format, then you want to worry about image quality. And these are 3 totally different things and are controlled with different parameters. Compression is a 3-step process. It sounds a little obvious, but this is the way it works. You select something, you do something to it, and you put it somewhere. So we're inside Premiere. We select the sequence that we want to export. We export it. We run it through Compressor, and then we send it somewhere. Simply compressing a file doesn't do us any good. What we need to do is not only compress the file and make it accessible somewhere on our website or YouTube website or on a hard disk. This process of selecting something, doing something to it, and putting it somewhere is what Compressor calls a task. Here's the key compression rule. This is true of all compression, all the time, always. Never worry about the format of your source media. Your source media can be 800 gajillion gigawatts in size. It doesn't make any difference. Whether the file is 500 megabytes, a terabyte, half a megabyte, I don't care. Nobody cares. All you're doing is setting parameters for the finished file. And the reason is, if I've got a source file which is in H.264, it's going to be tiny. If I've got a source file which is in ProRes 422, it's going to be pretty big. If I've got a source file which is uncompressed, it's going to be gigantic. Whether it's H.264 or ProRes or uncompressed doesn't make any difference. It's going to end up with the compression settings that we ourselves create. All compression software automatically determines the specs of your source file. It reads the source file. You are creating the destination file location, and the parameters you want that destination file to reach. The compression software only needs to know where you want to put it. I get emails, I get about 300 emails a day from people that are asking me questions about video editing and about video compression and audio. And one of the most common questions is, I've got this 500 megabyte file. How am I going to squeeze it down to a megabyte? It's an easy answer. I've got a 200 megabyte file, gigabyte file, trigabyte file. Doesn't make any difference. The process is the same, and you're all going to be experts at it by the time today is over. Compression, both audio and video, is a balancing act between the smallest file size and the highest image quality. There is no perfect setting. Every movie is potentially different. I've got a friend of mine, Phil Ashby, lives over in the west of England, has fiber to his home. Fiber to his home. This is like an unlimited bank account. That's how can you be so lucky? He has so much bandwidth coming into his house and going out of his house that he regularly sends 4 gigabyte files in all directions. I can send 4 gigabyte files if I wait a week. It takes forever. Well, if we had unlimited bandwidth, if we had unlimited uploads, if we had unlimited downloads, we'd never compress a file, because we're always giving up image quality when we compress, always. There's something that's being lost. But because we don't have unlimited bandwidth, and if everybody in this room does, the rest of the world does not, because we don't have unlimited bandwidth, we have to compress files. This is the key thing. File size is totally dependent upon bit rate, totally. You want to make a file bigger, you have a high bit rate. You want to make a file smaller, you have a low bit rate. The variable that we control, the only thing that cares about file size, the only thing that determines file size is bit rate. The lower the bit rate, the smaller the file. And so you all write, great, I'm going to have a bit rate of 1. You're going to have a file which is exactly 1 bit wide. It's going to be download so fast, it'll be there before you know it, except image quality is based upon 4 variables. Higher bit rates yield higher quality. Bigger images require higher bit rates. More frames per second require higher bit rates. More movement between frames requires higher bit rates. So therefore, the size of the file is dependent upon 4 criteria: the bit rate, the frame size, the frame rate, and the amount of movement between frames. If you want to compress something down to a really, really small file size, don't move anything. Just have it be a lockdown shot with lockdown talent, with nothing moving in the background. That'll compress down to nothing. I do a screencast webinar. It runs an hour. I can compress 1 hour of video with excellent quality picture and excellent quality sound down to 25 megabytes. Well, if I were up and moving around, I couldn't get it that small, because as soon as I add more movement to the frame, the file size has to increase. So we adjust the bit rate to yield the best quality for our video based upon these 4 variables. If bit rates are too low, you end up with rectangular blocks appearing in your image. That's called artifacting. The more movement that you have, the more artifacting you get. Classic example, talking head standing in front of a lockdown camera, but there's leaves blowing in the background. Every frame is different because from frame to frame that leaf moves. So your compression is going to be huge because the background is moving. If you know you're shooting somebody that's going to go on the web, put them in front of a background that doesn't move. They can move. Having a person move is less than having an entire wall of leaves move. You can compress it down smaller. Video compression yields the best results when there's very little movement between frames. If, for instance, this handsome gentleman in the front I'm photographing him on a close-up, and he's sitting here like this, and he's not moving. I can compress that down to nothing, because 1, it's a tight shot, and when you're talking, the only thing that moves is your eyes and your mouth. But if this beautiful lady sitting next to him, who we know is a professional dancer, we're illustrating exactly how to do professional dance, and she's up and moving and spinning around, and the camera's going like this. There's all kinds of movement. The difference between frames is gigantic. Here, all that's moving is his lips and his eyes, handsome though they are. But with her, I've got full body movement moving in all directions. He'll compress down to about that size. She'll compress down to about that size. And the only difference is not the frame size, not the frame rate, but the amount of movement between frames. YouTube is a special case. Because YouTube always recompresses your work, you need to feed YouTube what we call an intermediate file, which is a file suitable for recompression. Let's say, hypothetically, and I can't remember exactly what the numbers are, let's say ProRes has a bit rate of 15 million bits per second. It's actually much higher than that, but we'll just pretend it's 15 million bits per second. I would then create an intermediate file for YouTube at 10 million bits per second. This makes it 1/3 smaller than the source file, but still pretty big. YouTube then grabs that file at 10 million bits per second and squeezes it down using its own proprietary codec to 1 million bits per second, reducing it 10 times. YouTube always recompresses your video. If I send it the file size that YouTube is ultimately going to create, a file that has 1 million bits per second, it's going to compress it down 10 times to 100K. It's going to take it and make it 10 times smaller. If I don't give it lots and lots of bits to work with, it's going to throw away essential bits, and all I left with is what you see on YouTube all the time, a really, really, really grainy video because they fed it something that was too compressed in the first place. So with YouTube, we create a high bitrate intermediate file to be able to generate a high-quality YouTube file afterward. So what I want to do is I want to show you how to import a video, how to apply an existing compression preset. We'll compress a file for YouTube, and we'll compress a file for an iPhone. We'll create a test compression so we can make sure that it works okay. We'll create and modify a new compression preset. We'll add some video filters for watermarks and gamma settings, explain why you want to use that, color correction, and we'll also automate with a droplet. Again, for those of you using other software than Compressor, importing a video is the same across all software. Applying a compression preset, they all have compression presets for this. You can just do a search for in the compression setting. Test compressions is exactly the same concept across all software. Compression presets for watermarks, gamma, and color will vary by application. This will be compressor specific. Droplets are absolutely compressor specific. Most other compression software uses what's called a watch folder. The benefit to a droplet is the application does not have to be running. In a watch folder, which Telestream uses and Sorensen uses, a watch folder requires the application itself to be running. So let's get to work. This is Compressor. In this presentation, the projector limits me to a screen resolution of 1280 by 800. This screen is designed to fit in a 1280-720 space. It works better at 1440 and above. We're a little squeezed, so I just want to explain that that's because of the projector that we're using. There are 5 windows inside Compressor. This is the task window. This is where you load videos. This is the preview window. This is where you see what the videos look like. This is the history window. This tells you the status of a project that's being compressed. This is the inspector. This is where you make changes and set the settings for compression. And this is where you access existing settings and existing destinations. Of these windows, they're all important, but the task and the inspector window are the most important. We can add a file in a wide variety of ways, but the one that I like the best is this choice right up here that says Add File. I'm nothing if not obvious, so we'll take and add a file. And let's see, we'll add, let's see, I've got a file over here on my second drive, because I love having media on a second drive. And we'll go down to source media, which is where all my source is stored. The folks at Pond 5 have given me some clips to play with, which my entire staff is sick to seeing, but I'm very grateful to Pond 5 because they shared the clips with me. And we'll compress something that's really tricky. If I can get it here, there it is. Click on Youth Culture. Click on Open, it opens it up. Select the task, and after a moment's worth of time, it'll show up in the preview window in a second. If I want to create you just don't want to show me the video, do you? All right, be that way. If you want to compress a file for YouTube, the easiest thing to do is just do a search for YouTube. And notice that down here inside the settings window, several YouTube settings exist. One that creates a very, very small file size, smaller than standard def, a standard def file. which would also work for PAL, even though it's labeled 480p, it would work for PAL as well. We've got a large file, 720p and 1080p. These would be used for high def. My recommendation, by the way, for high def for the web is to always work with 720p. 720p is a really nice image. It can be viewed on everything from mobile devices up to towers. It has a small download size. It doesn't cost you a lot of bandwidth. And for 1080p, the problem is 1080p is going to require some fairly significant compression, and not everybody can view an image that's that big. They're going to have to scale it down. I would much rather feed them something they can look at 100% size. So I select the 720p format. To apply a compression setting, you grab it from the settings folder and drag it on top of the video. And now it shows up over here. The reason that I like using this as an example is the hardest thing to compress in video are highly saturated colors that are gradients. This is a really good test of whether you've got good compression or not. Because if my bit rate is too low, I'm going to get a whole bunch of rectangular blocks that show up inside the video that say your bit rate is set too low. Gradients are really hard to compress well. Moving leaves, finely detailed background is really, really hard to compress well. Again, if you're trying to make file sizes small, avoid gradients, avoid small moving objects. Those would all be useful. When I drag that setting up, three things appeared across the top. Now this is compressor specific. This is the compression setting that I'm using. I use a preset that's designed for YouTube. This is the destination of where the file is going to be stored, and because it's red, it says that it can't find that destination. I'll create a custom destination in a second and show you how to do that. And this is the name the compressed file is going to achieve. So setting, destination, file name. There are four built-in settings for compressor. They're grayed back, but I'll zoom in on them. Cluster storage is used when you're working off a network and you've got a cluster working. A cluster is where multiple computers are working together to compress video. It's a good concept. Apple has never gotten it to work reliably. Apple brags about the fact that you can have multiple computers working at the same time. I have been trying for 5 years to get cluster compression to work, and I got it to work once. Exactly one time. It happened to be the time I was at lynda.com recording an online tutorial about how easy it is to create cluster compression. I got it to work 5 minutes before I recorded the video. It lasted through the tutorial, and I've never gotten it to work since. So give up on cluster storage. Desktop is self-evident. Source means it's stored at the same location as your source media. And the user's movies folder is it'll automatically compress the file and drop it into your movies folder. I have a love-hate relationship with the home directory. I think the home directory is wonderful. I'm glad it exists, and I try to store as little in the home directory as possible, because as soon as I put something in my home directory, nobody else can access it because I'm not giving my password to anybody. So that means that everything that I've stored in my home directory is locked up, and the only person that can use it is me. I am a firm believer that media needs to be stored to a second drive. And I think whether it's compressed media or whether it's source media, editing media, render files, anything, use the home directory as little as possible. It keeps you out of trouble. Well, I need to create a location for this to be stored. I don't want it on the desktop. My desktop is cluttered enough. I'll never find the file. I don't want to store it in the same location as the source. I can't remember where the source file was stored. How am I going to find the compressed version? What I learned many, many years ago is to create a custom destination. And I do this for all my compression software because I use it all. I create a custom destination on what was my hard disk. Okay, here, hard disk, come here. Let's open up a new Finder window. Okay. It is just terrifying when I look at my desktop and there's nothing there. Okay, so I go to the second drive. On my second drive, I create a new folder. I call that folder Compressed Files. This is a folder that I create on the hard drive that I want all of my compressed files to be. So I create that folder. Once I have it created, Compressor, I then go to the Destinations tab. The symbol that Apple uses to create something new is the plus key. I'm going to create Back up a second, cancel, cancel. When you hold the plus key down, you have the option of creating a local destination like a folder on your hard drive or a remote destination like an FTP site. So I'm going to create a local destination by clicking the plus key. I'm going to navigate to my second drive, highlight the folder called compressed files, and click open. I've now created a destination called compressed files. If I go to the inspector, I can change the name of the compressed files. I had an earlier version which I needed to delete. So now I have this compressed files folder, which points to that folder on my second drive. To apply that custom destination, I simply drag it on top of the task, and it now stores the file there, but I hate having to remember to set a custom destination. Instead, I go up to Compressor, go down to Preferences, and I set the default destination to be compressed files. Now, regardless of where the movie comes from, regardless of when I do it, now or later, all of my compressed files will always show up in the compressed files folder. I've automated this so I never have to think of it again. In fact, I can take this one more step when we create droplets to automate even further. So what I've done is I've created a custom destination. I've applied it to a pre-built setting for YouTube, and I've told it to compress it. And if I click Submit, it goes off and compresses it. One of the advantages of using Compressor is that it is multiprocessor aware. It'll use as many processors as you have on your system. It'll use as much RAM as you have on your system. The RAM allocation is it uses 1 gigabyte of RAM for every processor. So to make the maximum speed out of Compressor, if you had an 8-processor system, you need 8 gigabytes of RAM. If you have less RAM, it'll work with it. It just won't work as efficiently as if you allocated a gigabyte of RAM, and the allocation's automatic. If you had in your system 8 gigs of RAM for Compressor, for an 8 gig system. So that's it. I click Submit. It says, now this thing up here, where it says name, this is not the name of your compressed file. This is the name of the batch of files that you're submitting to Compressor. If you're sending lots and lots of files across and you want to know file status, you could name your batch. I have never been that interested in knowing the name of the batch of files that I send. I've always left this to be untitled because we are naming the file here in the task window. So I just leave it untitled and click Submit. In this particular case, I'm not going to compress that file. I'm just going to highlight it and delete the task and move on. I think I'm going to delete the task, clear source. Good. And we'll highlight that and delete that. Key takeaways. First is we import the file. Second, we apply a setting for YouTube. All the default settings for YouTube and Compressor are fine, the same as they're fine in Sorensen and Telestream. YouTube wants a really high bitrate file, so it can recompress it and you end up with really high quality. The one thing you never do is feed YouTube a highly compressed file. It's going to end up with artifacting. It's going to look terrible. Oh, I should show you one more thing. Let's see if I can get it back. No. All right. So let's just do one more thing. Let's go down to Source Media, Pond 5, and let's do Dancing Heart. And we'll apply our YouTube setting. And because we set the preference, notice it automatically applied my setting, automatically gave me the name. I click Submit. I click Submit again. Now, what happens down here in the history palette is it shows us the status of the compression of that job. And this is wonderful, except we don't need to have Compressor running. As soon as I click OK, all Compressor is a front end to a daemon, which is a Unix term, a piece of software that runs with no user interface, that runs in the background. I can quit out of Compressor. The same instant I send the file, quit Compressor, you're done. Compressor does not have to be open on your system to do compression. The actual compression is done by something else. Let me go feed this again, call it V1, and click Submit, and it's compressing. I quit Compressor, don't save, go to the Utilities menu, and open up Activity Monitor. The Activity Monitor shows that the compression's done already, but there's a thing called Compressor D right there. When it shows back up again, Compressor D, that means it's a daemon. The daemon has no user interface, no user controls. It's lurking in the background so that when you run a compression job, it fires up as many processors as you need and it compresses it. The benefit to this is that you don't have to actually run Compressor. You can just quit Compressor. And the benefit here is that we can now automate the process. If all Compressor is a front end, and I can determine the front end ahead of time, I can automate the whole process and feed files using droplets without even working through the process of using Compressor. I'll explain that more in English when we get a little bit closer. Let's try adding another file. So we click the Add File category, go to Pond 5, and this time we'll bring in, I need something bigger, Twin Waterfalls. All right, we'll do that. There's our Twin Waterfalls, and now it decides it's going to show us a picture. And this is somewhere in Hawaii, and there's water falling. Now, I'm from LA. I just like looking at water falling just because it's fun. Can we wait until the end? Only because I'm going to have trouble hearing you, and I want to make sure I've got time to concentrate on your question. So I will answer it, I promise, but not at this moment in time. So now I want to create a custom setting. We've seen how we create custom destinations. You go to the Destination tab, you click the plus key, you say it's an FTP site, it's a local hard disk, whatever. Apple's destinations are stored in the Apple folder. My custom destinations are stored in a custom folder. Same thing with settings. Apple has settings here inside the Apple folder, which are broken down by category, and they're all wonderful, and their mothers love them. But I don't like any of them for my website. I'll use it for DVDs. The settings for DVDs are pretty much okay. Well, no, they're not. I'll show the DVDs. If we were compressing for a DVD, here. Okay. In Compressor 4, when you go to the disk burning setting, we've got Dolby Digital Professional, that compresses your audio, and MPEG-2 DVD. You need to apply both because this compresses to a video-only clip, this compresses to an audio-only clip, and you need to have both. So I'm going to drag both up to here, and they're now both applied. I'm going to click the Dolby Digital first to load it into the inspector. The inspector's where we make changes. I'll pull this down so we can see what's going on. Dolby Digital is a locked box. Apple licensed it from Dolby, but Apple is not authorized to make any changes to it. Only Dolby can make changes to it. And it's not bad if you're compressing audio to be distributed on a Dolby theatrical environment, but it isn't adequate if you're distributing audio that goes to the web because the default settings are wrong. Apple can't change them because that's not contained inside the license agreement. So what we need to do is we need to change them ourselves, and here's how. In the inspector are 6 tabs. This gives us a summary of what we're working with. This is the encoder. This is how we change the compression settings. This is frame controls. We don't use that until we're changing image size or changing frame rate or changing interlaced to progressive. This allows us to add filters, and we'll do that a little bit later with an MPEG-4 compression we're going to do. This allows us to change the image size, the geometry. And this notifies us when our compression is done. The heavy lifting is done inside 2 tabs, the encoder tab, which is where we set compression settings, and the geometry tab, which is where we set the final image size. Here, we're doing audio, so there is no geometry because there's no picture. Notice down here, I love this. This is so cool. See dialogue normalization? Dolby is so concerned about the audience sitting on their couch that they want you to be able to put in one DVD after another and never have to touch the volume control on your TV remote control because that would cause you too much work. So they want to have all the dialogue across all Dolby normalized DVDs to be exactly the same level. And that's what that dialogue normalization does. -27 sets that to Dolby specs, and what it's doing is it's changing the actual level of the mix that you spent $8 gajillion doing on a professional soundstage. It's changing it to meet Dolby specs. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want anybody touching my mix. I want that mix to be exactly as I've created it. So we need to turn this off. And to turn this off, we just have to change the value to something that will turn this off. And that number is the very intuitive negative 31. That's how you turn this off. You don't go to 0, it'll totally destroy your audio. Negative 31 says no changes are being made to our audio mix by this Dolby setting. Now, I'm sure all of you would have come to that conclusion after just a moment or two of experimentation, but I thought I would save you a moment's worth of time. The next thing that we need to do is we need to go, I mean, it's obvious to you, is it not? I'm sure Chris knows that all the time. So we'll go to the pre-processing tab here, click here. We're going to try to click here. Okay, pre-processing, there we go. Notice that it says film standard compression. I'm creating a film. I want my audio to be compressed. Therefore, I want film standard compression. You'd think so. You would be wrong. This is not digital compression. This is level compression. It's like putting a second compressor or a limiter filter on top of your audio. It's messing with your mix again. I don't want my mix messed with. This is not making the file smaller, it's flattening the audio gain. Be sure to set that to none. So, set dialog normalization to negative 31 and set the pre-processing compression preset to none. I'll wait another second for those of you taking photographs of the screen, and then we'll move on. Once we've got our audio set, the next thing we need to do is we need to set video. Now here, the MPEG-2 settings are really quite good, whether you're working with PAL or whether you're working with NTSC, except for two, and I want to share with you what those are. When you go to the encoder tab, by the way, see where it says allow job segmenting? Job segmenting is only needed when you have multiple compressors combining to compress your video. It allows it to stitch it apart and stitch it back together again. You can leave it on. It's absolutely meaningless when you're working with a single compressor, so don't worry about that. You can turn it off. It actually should be off if you wanted to know the truth. Notice the quality setting. If you want the best looking DVD, you want to change the mode to 2-pass VBR best. It will take longer. Nobody is paying you to get your DVDs done quickly. They are paying you to get the DVDs to look great. So set this to 2-pass VBR best. That's first. Second, set the average bit rate to 7.2. Sorry, set the average bit rate to 5.5. Set the maximum bit rate to 7.2. This will allow you to get about 88 minutes of video on a single layered DVD. 2-pass VBR best. The first pass through would take notes on what's moved and what the settings are. The second pass through it compresses it. Average bit rate of 5.5, maximum bit rate of 7.2, and motion estimation has nothing to do with compression. It has everything to do with guessing where pixels have moved. If you want to speed up your compression time just a bit, set the motion estimation to better. Best is best, but better is actually better because better means that you're spending less time in compression, and the best does not give better quality. Better gives as good a quality as best, so better and best are actually the same, except better is better than best because it's faster. I'm sure you have that all completely clear in your mind. So that's how you change that. That's the only settings you need to mess with. One for audio compression and the other for video compression. Well, let's now create something specifically for the web. We'll click the plus key, and these are all the different formats that we can create inside whatever this program is called, Compressor. In the past, meaning up until about a year ago, whenever I was posting to the web, I would create a QuickTime movie. What's happened over the last year is the industry, including Apple, has shifted from support of QuickTime, which Apple still supports, into supporting the HTML5 spec, which is an MPEG-4 movie. So my recommendation now, when you're feeding to YouTube or you're posting for a browser to read, you want to be HTML5 compliant. You want to create an MPEG-4 film, so you want to create MPEG-4, not a QuickTime movie. In point of fact, for the stuff that I post to my websites, I have QuickTime movies, I also create MPEG-4s, and I also create WebMs. I can't create a WebM inside Compressor. I'll use Sorensen Squeeze for those situations where I need WebM. MPEG-4 is probably the universal standard right now, and probably your best choice, unless the leading browser that people are accessing you on is Firefox. If you need to support Firefox, you have to create a WebM movie because Firefox, for some reason, is not currently playing MPEG-4. I don't know why, and I can't explain it. Okay, I just selected MPEG-4, and now we're going to set our specs up here in the inspector. So I'm going to call this MP4, because that's the shortcut, and we're going to call it a 1280 movie. Let's see, we'll call it MPEG-4 4BVE. That's going to be the title. The description, it's going to be a 720p movie. It's going to be a mono audio, and it's going to be a watermark. We'll do that. This name is totally up to you. The description is totally up to you. It doesn't make any difference to me. It doesn't make any difference to your compression setting. We're going to look at this across the top. And the file format, MPEG-4, that's because we picked it. The file extension is MP4. Don't change it. That's correct. Job segmenting is that works with compressors. Sorry, works with multiple computers. Frame rate. The best choice for frame rate is to leave the frame rate to match the source video. It used to be, when we were using Cinepack compression, that we would slow the frame rate down because the compression was done on a frame-by-frame basis, and we could decrease file size by decreasing the number of frames we compressed. If I cut the frame rate in half, it would cut the file size in half. That's true of old iframe-based compression, but not true of the newer long GOP compression of MPEG-2 and MPEG-4. With those, it really does, the frame rate doesn't make a big difference in terms of image size because of the way that the actual video gets compressed. In frame 1, if I've got a pixel right there, and let's say I've got this block of gray right here. That's pixel position 1.1 to 1.10 to 10.10 to 10.1. So I've defined it in terms of a grid. So many pixels across, so many pixels down. In the old days, I would say I'd have to record the color value and position of each one of those pixels. Now, I just say this block from 1.1 to 10.10 is a single color, gray. I can compress that very simply. It's like in the paper, you read a chess match. You've seen it on reproducing a chess match. A chessboard's 8 squares across, 8 squares high, 64 squares. But when they report the chess match, they just simply say which piece on the chessboard moved from which square to which square. Knight's pawn moved from knight's pawn 3 to knight's pawn 4. Chess people, forgive me. But all they do is they describe the pixel that changed. They don't describe all the pieces that remain the same. They just simply say everything is the same except this one piece that moved here. When all you're describing is the changes, I can make compression really easy because I'm simply describing a change document. Okay? There's a shortage of whiteboards here. The first frame is an I frame. That's a complete image. The next frame in compression is a B frame. The B frame is a list of changes that looks back to the I frame and creates a word processing document like Microsoft Word, and it says just these pixels have moved. The next frame is not an image either. It's another B frame. So I got the I frame, the B frame, and the B frame. This B frame looks back to that B frame, and it's a word processing document that describes how the pixels have moved from frame 2 to frame 3. But this is not a picture. It's just a word processing list to say the pixels have moved here. Well, the next frame is a P frame. Let's look back at the I frame. It's another word processing document. Then we have a B frame and a B frame and a P frame, which looks back here. And we got another B frame and a B frame and a P frame and a B frame and a B frame and a P frame and a P. We got 14 B and P frames and one image. If I'm playing everything in straight line, it plays back perfectly. But as you start to move back and forth, you got to reconstruct that whole group of pictures to figure out where you are. So a long GOP compression is perfect for playback, but not so perfect for editing, which is why I tell all my Final Cut and Adobe Premiere people always convert H.264 because it's compressed with long GOP and it takes forever to decode. Anyway, frame rate, match what the source is. With MPEG-4, the keyframe interval is set to 5 to 10 times the frame rate. So if you've got a lot of movement, set it to 5 times the frame rate. If you have less movement, set it to 10 times the frame rate. It reduces the number of iframes you're creating, and it reduces your file size. Multipass will improve your quality, but will slow down your compression. Okay, bit rate. The sole determiner of file size is bit rate. The smaller the bit rate, the smaller the file. Image quality is bit rate, frame size, frame rate, and movement. If you have a really big frame, 1080p, you have to have a higher bit rate because there's more pixels. If you have a mid-sized frame rate, 720p, you can slow the frame rate down without hurting the quality. Create a really small frame, your bit rate can be tiny because you've only got a few pixels. Creating a 720p frame, here's what I recommend. If you are working in PAL and you want to create a PAL size, set this to 800. That's a good place to start. If you're working with 720p, set this to 1200. That's a good place to start. If you're working with 1080p, set this to 1750. That's a good place to start. Then, once you've got that, it was 800, 1200, 1750. Then compress a short movie. Here's how. I'm going to set this to be right here. I'm going to just put my playhead and type the letter I to set an in, type the letter O to set an out. I've now created something which runs a little less than a second. Okay? I find a part of my movie that's got the most movement. Compressing still frames is easy. You find the part of your movie that's got the most movement. Highlight a second of that movement where you need to see detail, where you want to see what's going on, not where it's just simply moving and blurry because that's not a test, but where your actor is running or the camera's panning and you need to keep focus. Then compress that 1 or 2 seconds. It's going to, even with a highly complex compression algorithm, it's going to compress a second in 2-3 seconds. You're not going to waste a lot of time. If you can make that moving portion look good, then you'll be able to compress the rest of the movie because that's the hardest part of the movie. So you compress just a short piece of it. Once that short piece has been compressed, look at it. If there's no compression artifacts, then go back and change that bit rate and make it 100 bits shorter, smaller. And keep doing that until you find the point where you suddenly start to get that artifacting in, and then boost the bit rate back up. This is how you test to find out what's the best bit rate. Well, Larry, why don't you just tell me what the best bit rate is? There is no best. It depends upon the amount of movement, it depends upon the frame rate, it depends upon the frame size. You tell me what frame rate, you tell me what frame size, you tell me how much movement, I can tell you exactly what bit rate to use. But each movie is a little bit different. So what I'm giving you is a target that you can start with. Where did we put the YouTube video? Rather than being at 1750, I set it to 10,000. YouTube is going to take it from 10,000 and squeeze it down to about 1,000. It's going to take 90% of your video and make it disappear. So I gave it a really big file. Here, I need to create a finished file. And we now created a simple test based upon the movement that we want to be able to see detail for. Then I'll grab the in, drag it back, grab the out, drag it back. So what we've seen is we now know some rough numbers to set our compression for. We now know how to set up our compression. What else do we need to learn? Well, we need to look at geometry. By default, look at the size that Compressor creates. By default, it creates a 640-480, a 4:3 image. This is not the correct size. So you go to this pop-up and you say, I want this to be a 1280-720. What this means is, regardless of what size you're starting with, you're going to end with 1280-720. Start with 1080, it'll end with 720. Start with 2K, it'll end with 720. A gentleman was asking me as I came in, Larry, I'm not happy with the way my stuff looks. Well, maybe if you start with a little bit higher resolution, start with a 1080 image, compress it down to 720, it's going to look better. Increase your bit rate, it's going to look better. But there's also some filters we can apply that will make it look better. There's 2 basic codecs, mathematics, that we use to compress video. There's H.264, which is proprietary, and all the compression people have to license it from the guys that invented it. And there's X.264. This is open source. And x.264 and h.264 yield files that are playable on exactly the same browsers. Unless you're a dweeb, you will never be able to tell the difference between h.264 and x.264. There are times where compressing a file using x.264 will look better than h.264. So do a Google search for x.264. It can be installed on your computer. It's accessed by all major compression systems. And if you're not happy with the look for that particular movie of h.264, compress it with x.264. The math is similar, but not the same. x.264 is free. Now, if you're somebody that hates installing codecs and doesn't want to touch anything, just stay with h.264. Perfectly reliable. For somebody that wants to tweak, x.264 is tweakable. And then you can select it. In a second, I'll show you how. Let's take a look quickly at filters. If you think of a grapefruit, think of the top of the grapefruit, the middle of the grapefruit, and the bottom of the grapefruit. Pure white is at the top, pure black is at the bottom, and midtones are in the middle. Your ability to adjust color is where the grapefruit is the widest, which means that your ability to adjust color lives in the midtones, in the middle. So what I do is when I'm compressing, the H.264 codec takes a little bit of color away. And so I add 3 clicks of red, 3 clicks of green, and 3 clicks of blue during the compression, which increases my saturation without adding a color cast. So I'm able to essentially saturate my video just a little bit more to make up for the loss that occurs during compression. I will do this to everything where I care about the color. The next thing that I will do is gamma setting. In the old days, about a year and a half ago, PCs and Macintoshes had different gamma settings. This was intentional. When Steve Jobs invented the Mac, what he did is he set the mid-tone gray to be slightly brighter. So if you look at a photograph on a PC and look at a photograph on a Mac, it had more energy, more life. It popped more on a Mac because the mid-tone gray was set a little bit brighter, set to a value of 1.8. On the PC, it set it to a value of 2.2. Pictures seemed duller, they seemed dimmer, they seemed less lively, which is one of the reasons the Mac was adopted by the creative market, the photographers of the world, because everything they looked on a Mac looked better because Apple played with the gamma setting. If you want a picture to have a little bit more robustness, a little bit more richness, a little bit more fullness, change the gamma setting to a number between 1.05 and 1.1. This will darken the midtones, enhance the midtones, the midtone grays. It won't touch the blacks, it won't touch the whites, and it just makes it play better and look more vibrant. I'm not going to quite use the word romantic, but it leans in that direction. It makes your videos look sexier. The last thing that I'll do is I may add a watermark. Now, a watermark is that burned-in object that you'll see in the lower right corner. That's over here. On any of my videos that I create, I always put a watermark because I want people to know where that video came from, and my watermark has my website on it. So when we go look at the watermark down here, we can control what position that watermark appears in. I always set it to lower right. This determines how much you're going to scale it. I create the watermark at the size I want it to appear in Photoshop, and I put it in the location I want it to appear inside Photoshop, and I save it as a PSD document. This determines how transparent it is. I generally make it a little bit less transparent. I set this between 0.6 and 0.7, and then I select the watermark that I want to add. Well, I just happen to have a watermark that I can use here. In television, we call them bugs. And let's see, where did I put the bugs? Source media? Or somewhere else. Oh, I know where it is, it's on the desktop. And I've created a PSD file. The watermark itself is sitting on top of a transparent layer. So it's just transparent, and when I add it, look at it right over here. We see the watermark has now been added. in the low corner. And I can control how light or dark that is by adjusting the opacity, the alpha setting. This makes it really bright. This makes it really dim. And if you feed it a video that has an alpha channel in the video, you can actually key in moving video. So you can have a moving logo keyed in while you're working with it. Then all you have to do is, once you've done setting these settings, save it by clicking Save. Let's just pull this up. Hush. And once it's saved, you drag this up on top of your video, as we did before, and click Submit. Now this time I want to show you one more thing, and this is the share monitor. What the share monitor does is it displays everything that we're compressing and shows us the status of it. I use this for monitoring compression, and you turn the share monitor on by clicking the share monitor button up here in the top corner. I can now quit Compressor, and I can monitor my video compression. One last thing, because I've got about a minute and a half left, that I want to show you, and then we're done. When I go back to Compressor, I don't want to have to do this one time after another. I want to create a single setting that I can access, and that's called a droplet. And the way you create a droplet is you highlight your setting, click this middle section that says Add a Droplet, Compress for Web. I want it stored to the desktop, and I want it saved into the compressed files folder. And click Save. Now, when I'm ready to compress a video, all I have to do, if I could figure out where my desktop went, I don't know, but there would be an icon right here that says Compress for Web. You drag your video on top of that icon, it automatically sets the parameters of that setting and that destination, and it compresses it and stores it in the location that you specify. I've given you the sample compression ranges, so you don't need to see that. Compression is part art and part science. It starts and ends with the bit rate, and every movie can use different rates. However, similar movies can use similar compression settings, which is why droplets are so helpful. Creating droplets from settings that work can save a tremendous amount of time when compressing similar movies for the future. I've got a whole lot more information on Compressor. If you visit my website and just do /compressor, you'll see all the articles and all the webinars that I've created that can help you make your video look great. My name is Larry Jordan. Thank you very much.